Hi, I'm Valerie, and I am so glad you found me here at my podcast, Generation Exhausted, your podcast that tackles all things midlife burnout. Do you feel total dread at the thought of going to work tomorrow? Are your relationships stale and unfulfilling? Can you even remember the last time you felt passionate, fulfilled, or excited about life? If you can't even remember the last time you felt these things, then you are at the right place. Because I'm a psychologist and I specialize in helping you reclaim passion, purpose, and energy. And not just at work, but in all areas of your life. So stay with me for a few minutes and let's talk about this. Hi, so glad you guys are here today. Welcome to Generation Exhausted. I have my dear husband, Nathan, here with me again today. Hi, Nate.
Hi, beautiful.
Hey, we are happy to be here again with you. And we are on part 4 of a series introducing my platform and my passion, working with people in overcoming midlife exhaustion, burnout, soul fatigue. And today, by popular demand, it has been requested that we talk about parenting. We were going to jump to spirituality this week, but on the heels of gender roles and burnout, a lot of people have asked if we could spend a few moments talking about specifics around our experience parenting for children and how that relates to burnout. So, Nath, let's go ahead and get started. We were going to hit toddler years for a little while, then adolescent years for a little while, and I can't believe we are old enough to say we can now hit a whole entire section of having young adult children, 2 of them to be exact, which kind of blows my mind. I feel so not young adult momish. So
You don't look young adult momish.
I sure don't like to believe that I do. So thank you. Okay. So let's get back to the good old days. When you and I went to Texas together and you were in medical school and we had our first baby you would have just finished your first year of medical school.
Just in the first year of medical school, Mariah was born.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, the thing I remember most about those years was the sudden change in lifestyle, like the sudden change in doing anything. Whereas we used to be able to just jump in the car and go for a drive, go to the movies, go to the grocery store. Now everything had to be planned around sleep schedules, feeding schedules. We're not going anywhere if she's asleep because we are not waking her up. What's her feeding schedule? Is the diaper bag packed? And so just suddenly there was this kind of loss of freedom. But I think overall that was probably fairly minor compared to what you experienced, because being in medical school, starting rotations, and then all of the associated studying hours, labs and things, I just wasn't around that much.
Right.
So you had, I think, the harder burden those years for sure.
I will wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, yes, you were doing something astronomically challenging too, being in graduate school and medical school, I should say, to be exact. But yes, so beginning from really, we had 9 months before I got pregnant. And then we had a baby after first year of medical school, a baby after third year of medical school, a baby, and then 2 more babies in residency program. And so by the end of your formal training, we had a house full of rugrats. And I had done the lion's share of that by myself, if I may say.
No, you had.
Yeah.
Because even though residency was a step down in terms of hours and intensity, it was tough. Yeah, it was still intense.
It was tough.
So you had been kind of a part-time single mom.
I did. And I think there were sort of two phases of that. When you were in medical school, I do have vivid memories. And I just reflect back on this with a ton of gratitude that we lived in student housing. And I have some dear friendships with some women that I spent a lot of time with, a handful of young moms, and ironically one dad, because his wife was in medical school and he ran around with the group of girls. And we did everything together. We were each other's support system because most of us didn't have partners around and many of us didn't have family around either. I have never had any family living nearby since I was just in the beginning of my adulthood years. I've never had extended family support for extended periods of time. Of course, my sweet mom would come in and help with babies and things like that. But by and large, we were the Lone Rangers, you and me, out there. And it was tough.
Yeah, we were.
It was tough. Yeah.
I mean, we had some extended family in the area, but there was just a lot of isolation with medical school. You can't really plan a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do a lot of things. It's just,
yeah.
Because even weekends are taken up. You can't, we would work 6 and 7 days a week and sometimes 16, 17 hours. And you couldn't do things.
I think it brings up in me the struggle in how if I were to just zoom forward to the here and now and how much your burnout struggle with medicine has been, I'm looking back and thinking to myself, these hard years were what I was, the years that were hard were more bearable in my hope that it would be something else down the road. And so it's been, I think this is sort of where we have to look deeply and be okay with things changing, which is, it's been a little more challenging than I think we thought it would be. It's like, okay, just push through and it's going to be amazing. And we're going to have all this like abundance of money and happiness and contentment. And all these things are going to just look a certain way. And therefore I can now be okay. And clearly nothing ever turns out as rosy as we think. But I think I'm just reflecting on, like, if I were to look back and think about like, oh, can I make it through this? Well, sure. Because in 20 years, it's going to just be amazing.
Well, it has been amazing.
It has been,
but
it's been hard.
It's a different amazing.
Yeah.
But I think that speaks to a good point, and this is just general, which is we shouldn't be looking for our happiness in the future. That we can't say to ourselves, oh, everything will be better when this happens or that happens. And this is not unique to parenting, but it's just a good rule of thumb that we do need to learn how to live in the present and make the present moment a happy moment.
I think that is a remarkably wise statement. And yet what 25-year-old ever in the history of the world has been able to have that kind of wisdom? That's
why we're not doing this podcast when we're 25.
Yeah. I'm thinking of my 25-year-old self, and I spent accumulation of hours and hours daydreaming about what it would be like when, after this hard time was over, because it was hard. We were poor. We had a house full of littles. I was not well suited to stay-at-home motherhood. I vividly remember sobbing on the bed one day after you had come home and saying to you, and this is, I'm going to say this because I'm aware in saying this, that this is, other people will have different struggles, but this one was mine. I said to him, I got up, fed the baby, cleaned our postage stamp small apartment by like 9:30 in the morning, and I had nothing else to do. And I thought to myself, I cannot do this for, an infinite number of years longer than this. I just can't. And so that sort of circles us back to how I have been navigating from the very, very beginning, a way to meld parenting with my own needs as a woman, and how supportive you were in helping me navigate that too, in a way that was helpful and, wanting to be responsible and like a good, loving, kind mother, but also trying to get my needs met when I was out of gas. On the one hand, I was underwhelmed. On the other hand, I was overwhelmed with doing things that weren't necessarily satisfying for me, but meaningful. I had a sense of their meaningfulness. I just didn't particularly feel a lot of satisfaction in that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that manifested itself in things that I noticed. I think, we saw, and it wasn't just us. I mean, it was all these families that you mentioned, but we would see like these huge, elaborate birthday parties for kids that were 2. They weren't going to have any conscious memories of any of these things. But Cinderella cakes that were like decorated. I mean, you weren't a cake decorator, but you like took it up for one of their birthday parties. I just remember the Cinderella cake that was, amazing. And it's like, that is beautiful. And now we're going to eat it.
Right.
But I think what we were saying, and what I was saying, and then again, this is in retrospect, is that you were desperately looking for some sort of an identity. It's like, okay, these kids are now my life and I'm struggling with it, but I'm going to jump in and we're going to do it. We're going to make these birthday parties. And you got into like hairdos, and the kids would have these amazing, elaborate hairdos. And in retrospect, it's like, okay, you were an amazing mom. Absolutely. But I think there was also an element of, I'm trying to force myself to identify with this.
Okay. So I'm going to actually push back a little bit on those, not because you're wrong, but because I think there's a plot thickening element here. Speaking to the cake thing, my mom created beautiful cakes, and I think she legitimately enjoyed doing that. And I think that's where we have to really be careful about making judgment of anybody's choices, right? So in my mind, as a young mom, good moms spend 6 to 8 hours making elaborate Cinderella cakes, like with those little frosting tube things, and they like squeeze each individual thing.
Color.
And it's like a 4,000 squeeze process. And so I think that was, as a child, that was meaningful to me. I had mapped, wow, this cake that my mom made for me was amazing. And it didn't occur to me that there are a lot of different ways to be a good mom. And so I had sort of made a 1-to-1 correlation and did this thing because in my mind, that's what a good mom does. And yet that wasn't actually at all kind of who I was, as we've already talked about. Right. And I think the other thing that was so challenging for me was that the moment we started cutting the cake open, I felt this deep and profound sense of loss. Like, what in the world have you just done to my creation that I spent all this time on? Like, it felt very, it was a big deal to me. Like, you've taken this thing from me. I thought to myself, I should make something that is, that you can hang on a wall, but then I didn't like doing those things either. So there was no way out for me. Right.
Yeah. But I think like I said, I think the intentions were always good.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point too, which is that when you see a certain behavior, it's sometimes always difficult to know exactly all the motivations behind it. And sometimes there can be multiple motivations, but I think the motivations behind what we're talking about, which is burnout, are when you do it for the wrong reason, when you do it for appearances, or you're trying to put yourself in a box that you know you don't belong in. I think some of those things then end up contributing to, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep making these elaborate cakes year after year for 4 kids and so forth. Well,
yes. And I have to say, I'm really proud of myself, because even as when I was young and as unevolved as I was at that point in time, I have a memory of someone, I don't remember who it is, but you know how you remember the weirdest of things. One woman one time said, I'm putting this in the no guilt zone. And I remember one day going, I'm going to go to the grocery store and buy a cake, and I'm going to put the homemade cake situation in the no guilt zone. I'm not going to feel guilty about that. That is not me. And furthermore, you had probably contributed to that a little bit in articulating at some point in time, very kindly, I'm sure, that like the 3-year-old couldn't care less, Valerie, right? Like,
yeah, this is for us.
Right. Well,
and the neighbors.
For all I know, it was for the moms, right?
Yeah,
which kind of leads me to the second point in young toddler burnout years, which was I'm going to speak of perfectionism here, because as a clinician and a therapist working with a lot of young women, young moms, boy, do we use our children. I'm not talking about sort of when I use and abuse our children, I don't mean like you use and abuse in the more traditional way, but what I mean is we bear these beautiful little souls, and then we spend a heck of a lot of time trying to turn them into something that basically shares with the world how great we are as their parents.
Right.
And I think there's a real occupational hazard of doing that when, as a stay-at-home full-time caregiver, they are your only project.
Yeah. I have another memory of with the dads, same group of people. We would have these competitions about who had potty trained their kids the youngest. Yeah. Right. Yep. So it's like, well, my kid potty trained at 11 months, 7 days, and 2 hours. And mine was 11 months, 6 days, and 14 hours. And it was like this, somehow it was either reflective of the quality of our wives or the intelligence of our children, or both.
Probably both. Yeah.
And then, by the time we got to our last kid, we were lucky he knew how to go to the bathroom before he went to kindergarten. Because we were like, this is stupid. Right. It's like, please make sure you know how to go to the bathroom before you start kindergarten. But
we do have a back end, but it's around the age of 6.
Right. Not 6 months.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that's so true. And I think that really speaks back to my hair doing thing. The girls, we have two oldest daughters, and then our next 2 are sons. And it was really important to me that our daughters looked like little fashion models for really a lot of years, actually. And then back to your motive thought, I thoroughly do enjoy doing hair.
Yes, you do.
Like for its own sake.
Absolutely.
I always have. It's something that is just one of my little passions. And so there was an element of that, but I would be absolutely lying to say that was the only element.
Right.
What was important for the world to know about the Valerie of her 20s and early 30s was, this is my way of showing the world that I am in fact put together, and that I bring my product, which is my child or my children, and I show the world, whether it be at the library or at the grocery store or at the playgroup,
whatever, yeah.
I show the world my enoughness and my competence by the way my children look.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we learned that that's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable, and it puts such a burden on our children.
Right. Exactly.
I have vivid memories, and I think this is so funny when you think about how we dressed our oldest and then down to our number 4, who I think they become more and more well-adjusted as we get older. But our number 4, I bought a rolling, what do they call those those outfits that you just zip it up and their feet are covered. I mean, he wore probably 10 of those over the first 2 years of his life. And all I did was just go up to the next size.
Right.
Like the kid didn't even have a wardrobe. It was so handy, and he was so happy. And I was so much more of a chill mom for him.
Yeah.
He needed not prove anything to the world. He was just a little boy that could romp around. And I had no agenda with him.
Right. So I have a memory of going to church, and she was sitting in the pew, and she probably couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. And she started touching her hair, and you kept knocking her hand down because you did not want her to disrupt these braids that you had spent forever.
She was on performance,
putting in her hair. And then when she went to kindergarten, we had this really fancy Disney princess backpack because she was really into Disney princesses. Fast forward to Drew going to school, and the school sent home a backpack with him after the first day because the backpack we sent him with was so old and beat up that they assumed that we were poor.
Yes, so, I remember that.
All of a sudden, Drew shows up with this backpack. Where'd you get this backpack? And he's like, well, the school sent it with me.
Because we had such a piece of crap backpack
oh gosh, we feel so sorry for you,
right,
sir. Let's give you this new backpack to take home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was funny. And so I guess the moral of the story is I don't know that we felt like we were burned out at the time, but we were sure chasing some ideal of what a good parent is supposed to look like and getting ourselves really, really tired in the process.
Yeah.
And I will say, though, one thing we were as toddler parents that we sure learned a lot about when we became adolescent parents. As toddler parents, we were the expert of every adolescent parent's children.
Right. Yeah, no, and that was really funny in retrospect. We spent a lot of time criticizing how parents handled situations with their children and our families and people around us. And oh boy.
I know it's embarrassing to reflect on.
Awful. So we started learning. And I think in the adolescent years, I probably was a little bit more of the aggressor in terms of overdoing things, perfectionism, burnout. I came from a family that stressed high achievement, and that was a marker of your success, how well you did in school, how athletic we were, or what kinds of things we were involved in. And while I think those things were good, I took on that persona, much like what you were just mentioning, of I am valuable as a father if my kids fill in the blank are, top-notch students, straight A students, if they are involved in music and athletics and perform well in all these different areas. And I really took on this burden of sitting down and making sure that all the homework was done correctly every night, and that we practiced our instruments, and that our rooms were clean, and that we were exercising and involved in sports that they were good at. And it really became part of my identity to say, okay, I am a good father because all these things are taking place.
Yes. I think we both were on the same page in that pathological way, with one exception. I mapped pretty early on in the children's adolescence years that they were going to burn out themselves academically if daddy didn't put on the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
Am I right? Do you remember some conversations that we had?
Well, I think we definitely had to come back and circle around because I was myself just this super intense student. And I couldn't really understand why everybody else didn't see the world the same way. And so, yeah, you had to sort of be a balancing voice. And it took me a while to buy into it because I just had this fear. And again, this goes back to what I said before, which is that you have to look at the motivation, right? There's a lot of talented students out there who work very hard and whose parents are very supportive. But if the underlying motivation is that the parents either need to look good or relive something that they didn't do right, or there's a fear of how other people perceive me because of what my kids do or don't do, that's the wrong motivation. And again, is not sustainable. And that's what we learned. That's what I learned, is that was not a sustainable way of parenting.
I think you're absolutely right. We really had to manage, especially when our oldest was in those early adolescent years, how to parent her in a way that instilled in her a knowledge of her own capabilities. Right. I remember my even saying to you one time, listen, babe, if we'll never know what kind of a student she is until you back off a little bit. Like, I think she's a better student than you think she is. And so you were really hovering a lot, and it was very fear oriented.
Yeah. And then also imposing on her what she should be good at.
Yep.
In my home growing up, it was really emphasized to be good at math and science. And that was not the interest of our oldest daughter. But I didn't know that because I would never let off the gas until, she got a little bit older and began to see that she was a really good musician and that she was, a very sociable girl. And so things like debate and orchestra and some of the artistic things were things that she just was really good at. And I had to back up and say, okay, she's not going to take calculus in high school. And that was crushing at first. And then later I was like, okay, all right, fine.
Well, I think it circles back to what we were saying, in that most of the time we as parents are socialized to believe that our children are in fact extensions of us. And so if science and math are important to you, therefore you want a child who excels in science and math because it is sort of a feather in your cap that this child has become a protege of you.
Right.
And I think, again, healthy spiritual development is all about looking at that child and saying, yes, I want to support you in we all need to have a rudimentary knowledge of, all of the basics, right? But at the end of the day, and the older they get, the more we have to really let them start to flourish and find out who they are and what they love, and not push our agendas on them.
Right.
Even if what that means is they may not like something that we really, really wish they liked. And that's kind of painful. And I think also we have a lot of reinforcement in our society to sort of force a child, or really, really, really heavily influence a child to be the thing that we think that would be in their best interest, when in fact it's not.
Right. Yeah. And again, that was another one of those things I had to learn because it had been forced on me that there were all these careers that were acceptable, mostly because of the status that they held and how much money they made. And so I just couldn't even conceive of the idea of allowing a child to go down a career path that wasn't going to make oodles and oodles of money or have some really high status in society. It's just, why would I let my child be, a this or that when they could be a this or that? And then when I went through my own burnout, I was like, oh, okay. Now I know why we let people have some autonomy, because the dollar value of how society values you is not what brings you happiness in your work.
Yes. And I think too, what we're instilling in our children is the sense that we want you to become your own unique self. And if they get down the path and they do a thing that they love, all the better. If they do a thing that they love and they can't pay the rent, then as autonomous human beings, they will figure it out.
Right.
So we guide, but we don't guide too much. We love, but then we watch and we see how they're going to cultivate a life that is uniquely theirs. And that even kind of comes more heavily into play in the later adolescence and early adult years. But it's a challenge to navigate, because you don't want to be the parent that's not involved and that just sort of throws them out to the world and says, just do whatever you can. That's not what we're saying. But we also don't want to so closely micromanage them that they don't even know who they are and what they like. Right. And because they also want to be a part of the tribe. And I think that's something that we really can't overemphasize, that our children, especially if we have good relationships with them, they want to please us. They want to do well by us and make us proud. And so if we impose too much of our expectations on them, whether they be implicit or explicit, they lose touch with that deep self, that deep sense of self inside that says, this is where I'm drawn. This is where I think I would be doing the best good in the world. They don't even come to know that part of themselves, because they're always looking around, trying to figure out what it is that we want them to become.
Yeah. And I think that there's always a balance there, of course.
Right.
If one of our children comes to us and says, hey, I want to be a professional video game player, then we probably will say,
intervene.
Let's keep looking, right? There's more options than that. But certainly when our oldest daughter went through a phase where she thought she wanted to be a music teacher, that would have never been acceptable when I was growing up. And it took me a while to come to this idea of like, okay, that's okay. Mm-hmm. And it's not a slam on teachers, by the way. I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but just from the background where I was raised, that was not considered an acceptable, unfortunately, it was not considered an acceptable career. And I had to undo that in myself to look at it and say, it's a lovely career. In fact, something that I'm a little bit envious of. I hope at some point I can actually do some teaching myself, but it was a struggle for me, and to accept that she had a potential interest in that.
I think to speak to this idea that it's so good for us to have a relationship with our programming, don't you think? Mm-hmm. Like, in other words, the thing that you just said, until you became conscious of it, it was just a given, like that's not acceptable. And then we just shove that down the throats of our children until we suffer enough ourselves on other levels and go, wait a second, why is that a given?
Right.
And we've all been social. We all carry them all day, every day. And so it's so important for us in parenting, in our own transformative processes, as we're trying to overcome burnout. It's so important to go, now, wait a minute, why do I believe that? Like, what is the origin story of that? Or what is it about this thing that makes me so uncomfortable about the life that someone else is living, especially if it's a life that, comes from our own household and is, carrying our name and all those things. Like, why am I having such trouble with that?
Right.
And most of the time it has far less to do with them and there being something wrong with the thing. And it has a lot more to do with our getting honest with ourselves and saying, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. That's part of my wiring. I was programmed that way.
Yeah. And pushing against that really creates a lot of burnout, because I spent lots and lots and lots of energy and hours trying to force some of my kids to be interested in math, and they weren't.
Yeah.
And that burned me out, because teaching somebody math who just really doesn't like math is like kind of just banging your head against a wall all the time. Eventually the person banging their head gets hurt, not the wall. Right. And so, I saw that going on too. And you were very wise and gentle and gave me some good counsel and said, hey, back off. And so eventually I could see it for what it was. But yeah, I was definitely burning out. And I would say the same thing with the sports. It wasn't enough that my kids played sports. I had to be the coach of all the teams, and I had to be, the loudest dad on the sidelines. And I was just almost kind of living this life through their successes that I was just trying to validate that I had done a good job.
I think there's some sweet spot that we may never find, but I think it's the work of a lifetime to be trying to figure that out, right? Like being involved enough.
Right.
Because again, there's nothing wrong, Nath, with you having been wanting to be a coach, and you had some really satisfactory experiences being the coach.
You did.
But I vividly remember on a few occasions you're saying, Valerie, something's wrong with me. I am exhausted. If I go to one more practice and, have to rally another, herd of cats around a soccer ball, I'm going to do something drastic. And so that's where you had stopped sort of listening. We didn't have the language for it at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's where I think you had ceased to listen to the authenticity of your experience, and then had just leaned into this idea that good dads are always the coach.
Well, and good dads are good coaches. So I had to,
Mm-hmm.
the reason I was burned out around the, herding the cats and the girls softball is because they needed to look good. If I could have just gone and said, hey, we're going to have fun. We're just going to have fun. We're going to learn some new skills, but I want you to make friends, and I want you to, come over to the house and let's have some team parties. But it wasn't about that. It was about, I need my daughter to look good, and I need these kids to look good. And I want the parents and the bleachers to think, man, he's a really good dad. Again, the motivations were often, not always, but often warped.
Well, I think what's so valuable about conversations like this, and I'm even learning things from you as we're talking about this, which is the idea that so many things that we do are there are levels of motivation.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes the motivation is, primarily pure, but I think also it's so good for us to be really, really, really self-aware when we get into a situation, or when we sign up for something, or when we impose upon another person in the family, our children or each other as partners. Like, why is this so important? Do you need to, is this about you doing something to make me look good?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
right.
I think, I was thinking your coaching was my hairdos. Yeah. Right. And I think in both cases, it's a case of someone who doesn't really have a firm sense of self yet. And so they are extracting value from these people on the outside to reflect a sense of self to us that we don't have standalone by ourselves.
Yeah. And again, I think everything is a little bit more complex than that, because I really did enjoy coaching, and I really did enjoy being around the kids. It really was a fun time, but I would find myself getting annoyed when we were getting beat, or irritated at other coaches that were really intense. And it ceased to be fun, and it started to become personal. And there would be these projections that the coaches would have on each other, as all of us, as 30-year-old insecure dads, were trying to prove, that we were the best. So I think it swirled with good and negative emotions, but eventually it did lead to some burnout.
Yeah. Well, and I think I want to talk about maybe one more thing regarding adolescent years. And this is on me, but you were talking about the competitiveness of these coaches. And what it brought up in me, Nath, is that I think sometimes I have struggled in some competitiveness with you, because I've always sort of felt like you were sort of the favorite parent. And I think there are a lot of layers to that, some of which are just mine to hold, because I have been insecure. I think I remember, especially with every time you would go out in the backyard and play with the children, especially our sons, I would feel guilty. I should have felt gratitude. We shouldn't say should, right? And yet here I am offering to you my raw, vulnerable experience. I felt like, what's he doing out there again? He's making me look bad. Right? Yeah. I do remember too, reflecting on this with a girlfriend, and she has teenage boys as well. And her being completely baffled by my response and saying, I never go out and play with my kids in the backyard. And her husband did too. I didn't know that, but I was just reflecting. And I said, well, in my mind, I'm like, well, why don't you feel guilty? Because that's what any good mom would do. And she said, because I bring value to my children in other ways, Valerie. Right. And I mean, once again, oh my goodness, was that so powerful to me? And it really gave me pause that okay, is that true? Yes. What is it about that moment in time that is so hard for me to swallow? What is it? What's going on there? And to be honest with you, I don't know that I've even totally unpacked that, but it brought up a lot of my own insecurities. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just remember always being baffled by that too. It's this is how it is. Dads play sports in the backyard, and moms work on, meals. And
okay, that's a gender role moment there.
I know, but I was still in the gender role.
Let's go back to last week's last week's edition in the series. Right. So you didn't have a problem with it because you saw this falling along traditionalist gender roles, and maybe I was pushing back because there was a part of me that didn't want to fall
Yeah.
inside of those. I don't know. I
Well,
really don't even know myself.
And I guess I should be a little bit careful, but it certainly fell along interest roles. So in other words, I was far more interested in sports when our children took up baseball and soccer and softball and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was right up my alley because I did all those things as a kid, and I played intramural sports in college, and still tried to run and work out.
But so did I, though.
That was right. But team sports, I didn't think was as much. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
But for me, it just fell right into my wheelhouse of what I was interested in, and I didn't see that as something you were interested in, and it didn't bother me that you weren't interested in it. And so I just was like, you do bring value in other areas, and that's not cliche, but I mean, you really did have other things that interested you in helping the kids along. And so, you did all the puberty talks and the sex talks. That was really.
Are you saying that you get to go play sports in the backyard and I have to do puberty and sex talks? Okay.
That worked out pretty well.
And you helped me with those too.
Sometimes.
Oh dear. I may be a little further evolved in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I'll own that one.
Wow. Well, let's move to young adults. This is definitely our newest realm. We by far have no idea what we're doing 95% of the time in this one. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I would say 95% of the time I have no idea what I'm doing, and 95% of the time I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing nothing. Just like sitting back and saying, okay, this is what you want to do. All right.
Yeah.
We'll try to support you as best we can.
So we have a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old, both away at college. And it has been a really interesting experience. I don't know that I had any ideas of what to anticipate with young adults, but it's been a surprise. It's been different for me, right? I mean, I think there is that really strange moment where you acknowledge that what you say may or may not land, and that they're going to do whatever they want to do, right? And that you hope that that they make choices that are in keeping with what will bring them peace and happiness.
Right.
And yet, what I have really, I've really learned a lot about is that whatever those choices are, whatever choices they end up making, are going to be formative to their little souls.
Right.
And that has been absolutely just game changing for me, like letting go of the stress of you are a reflection of me. Sometimes they do things that really are a reflection of me. Great. Sometimes they don't. Great. Like, it's actually okay either way. But I tell you what, if you come from the way we've most of the time been socialized with our toddlers, with our adolescents, where we are socialized, especially I think as primary caregivers, to definitely have a reflected sense of self based on how cute the hair is and how, whatever that thing is, how well they play soccer, or if they make cheerleader, or if they're, the captain of the football team, whatever that thing is. If we really have benefited from that sort of model, that's going to be a problem. I think you and I tried really hard from early on to not sort of get sucked into that vortex, though.
Well, into the young adults, yes. Well,
even as younger, though, I think we tried really hard to say, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, we evolved into that. I mean, I wasn't very good at that at first, but yes, we did evolve into it. I mean, we did let our oldest follow her interests in music and voice and theater and things, which as a young dad, I would have never gone for. So yes, right. I mean, we did evolve into that. But I think we also just realized, and some of it's from doing it wrong, that the older they get, the less the lectures and the coaching really works. And the more we can say things like, well, in my experience, or, from what we have seen, we don't think this is the choice that might make you the happiest. But we've also learned that life's experiences at this point have to be the teachers.
Right. Right. And actually just what occurred to me as you said that, Nath, is that I just had an epiphany, actually. The more we instruct and try to teach, the less they want to hear it.
Yeah.
And the less we instruct and teach, the more they ask. Right. I mean, I'm just thinking about just today, I had a conversation with one of our young adult daughters, and she wanted my input and advice over something. I can't remember the last time I've offered that unsolicited. And simply, I mean, and that goes back even to the older adolescent years, right? It backfired.
Mm-hmm.
It did not go well.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that just today she said, these are the things. It was about a job situation and hours and stress and all the commitments and things. And she's like, what are your thoughts on this? And I thought to myself, well, you're asking. And I gently told her my thoughts. And she said, thank you. That's really what I needed to hear that. And yet, had I led with that,
right.
Or if we had a pattern in our relationship where I was leading with my agenda for her, even if it was for what I would consider her best interest, I guarantee she wouldn't be doing that. She wouldn't be asking for my opinion because she wouldn't be interested in it, because she would have probably been tired of hearing all of the opinions unsolicited, right?
And we were getting tired of forcing all of the unsolicited opinions. And this is where it was just like, again, banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you listen? Why don't you do what we say? Why don't you see that what we've chosen has, brought us happiness and success? And then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't working.
Right. Well, and it's not even appropriate to say that, right? I mean, like
well, but parents try. I mean,
they sure do
try. And so, and there might be people out there who look at what we are saying or what we have done and said, no, you screwed this up and you screwed that up. But I agree with you. As they got older, we just felt like we weren't getting anywhere. And so we said, okay, life's experiences can also be great teachers. They may be painful teachers, but they're effective teachers. And so we would have to just kind of sit back and, just like what you said, coach them when they said, okay, I'm really feeling burned out. I'm really feeling stressed out. I've already got 2 jobs. I'm thinking about this third one.
Yeah.
Because she had the same conversation with me, and you and I said the same thing. We're like, you can't burn the candle at both ends and in the middle. So you got to pick something. Well,
and it was interesting because in that case, I said to her, I asked a lot of, what I did is I kind of did the therapist thing. I asked enough questions that helped bring to light all of the problems that would have emerged had she taken the job. Now, I wasn't doing that in a manipulative way, but I simply was kind of like, okay, how many credit hours, how many hours, when would you do this? How long is it? And I think as the conversation evolved, it became clearer and clearer to her that, she got her answer.
Right. But the reason why you were able to avoid getting upset, angry, burnout, all these other things is because you're coming at it from a position of, I don't have to have you make a certain choice to feel like I did my job.
Nope.
You can choose what you want, and I'm okay with that. So therefore, my emotions are fine. My energy level is fine. My temperature is fine.
Yes.
My heart rate is fine. I will answer your question, but I will not choose to take personally whatever you do with that information.
Well, and I think the kids have to not only hear those words like come out of our mouths, they have to actually feel it, right? In other words, they have to know that we don't have some sort of a covert agenda for them. They have to know that at the end of the day, this is your life. And whatever it is that you're going to do with this beautiful life of yours, we're going to continue to love you. And, all we ask, you and I kind of always just said to the kids, we want you to be a respectful human being. We want you to be kind and good and make the world a better place. And how that looks, if it falls in line with, the way Dad and I have chosen, to craft a life, fine. But we want that to be your choice. We don't want you to do that because by doing something different, you would be rejected by us.
Right. And that it's not a sign of you rejecting us.
Right.
And so, I think that's really the key for me in parenting. And again, I'm not perfect, and kids don't always make the choices you wish they would. But for me to be able to be okay with myself is I had to have those letting go moments of like, it's okay.
Yep.
It's okay. If you want to go to this college instead of that college, you want this major instead of that major, it's okay.
Right. Well, letting go of the agenda, I think, is what we've had to do over and over again as we have approached parenting burnout, right? Is like, what is the agenda? I think that's always a setup for exhaustion when we're trying to sort of force something to be a certain way for us to be okay. And I think that's so challenging, right? Because we're socialized to believe that you have control within the walls of your own home. Like you can't control anything out in that big bad world, but boy, you can control all the things that go on here. And then you bring into the world these human beings that refuse to, be molded sometimes.
Right.
And quite frankly, Nath, I wonder if the greatest gift that we have is that we have beautiful children that insist on being unique individuals. They're not being automatons of us.
No, they're not. And yes, absolutely. And in addition to that, we have good relationships with them.
We do.
And so, I know there's a lot of parents out there who have been very, very controlling, and the relationships with their kids are mediocre, or some are good and some are bad.
Right.
And we decided that was a choice that we might have to choose between.
Mm-hmm.
And we want our kids to still come to us. We want them to trust us, want them to love us. And so we felt like we had to back off on the controlling,
the thought control, the life control, the behavior control.
Right.
Right. And it's really in many ways more about the philosophy has to be, the relationship trumps, everything else.
Right.
And then the other piece of it is you are not required to be a reflection of me.
Right.
You get to be you.
Right.
And also I get to be me. So it goes both ways, right?
But I'm okay with you being you. And that's where parents struggle. And that's where I struggled early on.
Oh, we all struggle. Right.
Okay,
yeah.
This is not a reflection of me.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
Go for it. Do it.
I mean, if anything, what I want to be a reflection of us, Nath, is that I want our children to know that they can be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want that to be the thing that is instilled in them. This unconditional love that we love them enough to let them be them.
Right.
And if they can then sort of pay that forward and be that to other people, like that is the thing that I hope we instill in them. And we have to kind of keep regrouping, as, new and different experiences emerge. But that is instilling in them something that is priceless, I think.
Agreed.
Any final words as we close up in talking about the twists and turns of parenting and burnout and identity development today?
Yeah, no, I would say that's just how I would summarize it, is that identity crisis in the parent is the source of burnout. When I felt like my kids had to be a certain thing, perform a certain level, and reflect on me, it was work and torture and exhaustion. And when I decided that my kids can be whatever they want, and I will support them. So they want to be good in math or they want to be good at soccer, I am 100% in, but it's them that drove it, not me. Suddenly parenting was not such a drag. It was fun. It was like, okay, yeah, I love going to the soccer games because you've chosen it and I'm in a supporting role, not vice versa. I didn't choose it and put you in the supporting role of you need to support me.
Wow. Profound. Thank you.
That's what happens when you do it wrong for 20 years.
Right. We're the experts on what not to do in parenting and how we burned out and how we're overcoming. So thank you all so much for being here. And we will join you next week. I think we are actually going to tackle burnout in the spirituality realm next week. So we'll see you all then. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me today at Generation Exhausted. There is so much more where this came from, so jump onto my online community at exhaustedgen.com, which is exhaustedgen.com, where you can get weekly support in your push to find passion, purpose, and deeper meaning in your life again. Also, hit that subscribe button and catch me here next week. And by the way, I am really glad that you're here because remember this. Burnout is your body's and soul's way of telling you that it's finally time to have your great awakening. See you next time. Bye-bye.